we're calling this series of webinars Health, Getting Back to Basics. And the first point of call really is for looking at weight loss and the laws of physics. And we can't really get around this. This is sort of a basic thing, and I'm afraid it comes down to 5 things. The only way you can lose weight is either you poo more, you wee more, you have to move more, wear less clothes, or less food. It is simple as that. We can't get around it. There is no such thing as a magical diet that you can pop a pill and you will magically lose weight. Although actually, if the pill only weighs a few grams, then if that's all you're ever eating, then of course you're going to lose weight. However, you probably won't feel very well with it. You'll feel continuously hungry, and this is not the point. So we need to look at that in practicality. Are you following me so far? Okay, so we need to get some basics right. The first thing is that this strange belief that vegetables somehow weigh less than meat. Whereas this is also, we're breaking the laws of physics here, is that 500 grams of broccoli will weigh exactly the same as 500 grams of chicken, whether it's outside or inside your body. It weighs exactly the same. You would have thought this is fairly obvious, and when you think about it, of course it's obvious. And yet there is this belief that somehow that by having vegetables, you will be somehow, you'll lose more weight. And it depends on how you look at it, is that the broccoli, 500 grams of broccoli, not that you'd ever eat half a kilo of broccoli, but let's just say, I don't know, let's say 150 grams of broccoli. You could quite easily have 150 grams of broccoli, and you could also have 150 grams of chicken. Now, this is all very nice, but actually, if you think about it, the 150 grams of broccoli will actually take up far more space in the tummy than 150 grams of chicken would. And so this is the question, is that when we're looking at things like weight loss, are we actually talking about weight loss, or is it actually that you want to change shape? And more often than not, it's actually that there is a dress you don't fit into, or a pair of trousers that doesn't quite, they're a little bit snugger. Okay, hello Chris Holloway, welcome. So the question we now come to is that when we're looking at approaches to whether it's diet, nutrition, weight loss, shape, fitness, and health, they are actually all different things. And depending on what you want, we need to address that in a slightly different way. So 150 grams of broccoli does weigh exactly the same as 150 grams of chicken. If you weighed yourself prior to eating that 150 grams, and then you ate it, and then you stood on the scales again, you would weigh exactly 150 grams more. You can't get around it. It isn't magically that suddenly broccoli or any other kind of veg is going to be magically, you're going to magically lose more weight than if you had 150 grams of chicken. It doesn't happen that way. However, there are other things about what you're eating that will then change. Now, as I've said before, broccoli is actually, because it's less dense, it actually takes up more space in the body when you've eaten it. So if we're looking at, say, having a thinner tummy, less bloated, for example, then actually having the chicken will take up less space while it's being digested than, say, broccoli would. It sounds a little crazy, but actually, if you think about it, if you weighed 150 grams of broccoli, it really would take up more space than 150 grams of chicken would. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, so it seems basic, but this is what I'm getting back to, is the amount of nonsense I hear on the media that is fed continuously everyone about weight and saturated fat and cholesterol and all this other nonsense. It doesn't make sense. We've sort of lost our minds. There's no common sense going on here. So what I'm combining with this series of webinars is a combination of basic common sense and also how your body actually really works. Now, when we come to things like our shape and weight loss, we have to accept something else that is, for some reason we've forgotten this, that actual fat is also less dense. So it takes up 3 times more space, or more in fact, than muscle does. Okay? So this idea of weighing ourselves, the whole concept of standing on the scales and weighing ourselves to see if we've lost weight, can really send us up the garden path. Is that if you tried combining, say, a diet and then decided to go to a gym and get fit, the actual very nature of getting fit will be turning that fat into muscle. Now, what will happen actually is if you carry on doing that, on the one hand, you could argue, oh yes, I'm eating well and I'm having a balanced meal. But what will happen actually is when you stand on the scales, the chances are is that you will either be the same weight or maybe even heavier because you're actually building up muscle. And so this idea of weighing ourselves, oh yes, I'm only 11 stone or 10 stone or 9 stone or whatever it may be, it has to change depending on what it is you're actually looking for. And it's such a basic thing, is the idea that that somebody's shape defines whether they're fat or thin or fit or healthy is complete nonsense. 2 people can weigh exactly the same as each other. However, they can be completely different size and shape. This is the nonsense of morphology, of our own judgment as Westerners. We sort of go, that person is fat, so therefore they must be unhealthy. Well, I tell you what, go and speak to the average Eskimo or the average sumo wrestler and see how far you get with that argument. Because quite honestly, those guys, we might consider themselves as being fat. However, they are very seriously fit. And actually, in the case of the traditional Eskimo, the Yupik Indians, there was a study done. They have the highest saturated consumption in the world. They have none of their 5 a day. Their main source of food in traditional culture will be seal and whale meat. Okay, they don't have any access to fruit or veg. It just doesn't happen. However, they don't ever get heart disease. Environmental factors in identical twins leading to different body shape. Absolutely. In fact, environmental factors exactly right. And what do we mean by environmental factors? That can be anything from pollution and such things. And this is where we can go into some of the later points within the getting back to basics. Is that one of the defense mechanisms of the body when we're talking about pollutants is it will produce fat as a quarantine mechanism. And so there are different types of toxins, and they will either be fat-soluble or water-soluble toxins. And the way our body deals with that is either by using fat because they're fat-soluble toxins, or by using water because they're water-soluble toxins, and to either quarantine them in the case of fat, or if we can get rid of them through our poo, then that's great, or through our urine in the case of waters. And this is where something else comes into play with regards to that's a good question, whoever asked me that question, by the way, because it's particularly relevant these days. Is environmental doesn't necessarily just simply mean outside environment, it is internal environment as well. Okay, and so if there is no system in the human body that does not rely on what we give it, and that means what we see, what we smell, what we eat, what we drink. You could argue what we listen to, all these other factors, they go into the environment of the cell, and our body will react accordingly. So in the case of poisoning, our body is actually very clever because its main source of defense, if you like, is always to defend the major organs. That means your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys, and your lungs. And what it will do is if let's say an easy example would be, say, alcohol. Now, alcohol, regardless of whether it's good or bad for us, is irrelevant at this point. In essence, it is a kind of toxin. It is, too much of it anyway, will be hitting the liver. So what the body does is it will form fat around the liver, hence when people have fatty livers, the body is actually trying to defend the liver from too much alcohol. So therefore the fat is actually acting like a sponge to draw away those toxins in whatever environment it's encountering. So in the case of alcohol, it'll be the liver that gets hammered the most. So therefore you will end up, someone who has too much of it will have a fatty liver. If there's a problem with the kidneys, you end up getting fat around the kidneys, and so on and so forth. So quite often when we look at someone who say we would that may be classified as by the medical establishment as being, oh, that person is fat or obese, whatever that means. The problem we have is that why is that person like they are? Is it simply because they're eating too much food, or is it they're eating too much of the wrong type of food, or the food that's actually got toxins in it? So therefore the environment that we're exposing the body to through the food is highly toxic, and so therefore the body is actually producing fat because that in essence is its way of defending itself. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, I'll take your silence as hopefully being a nod. I thank you for the heart as well, by the way. Yep, oh, Chris, all right, okay. Did that answer your question, Chris? Okay, so, cool. So, there is also this idea of morphology, and we are highly judgmental in Western culture, particularly, is we tend to define beauty as almost based on shape at the moment. The idea of, say, I don't know, Catherine Zeta-Jones or Kate Blanchett as being, aha, they are beauty queens, therefore, and they're shape X, so therefore this is the defining point, and anyone that's not in there somehow is less good looking or whatever else it is. It is sort of simply nonsense. And we also judge this based on whether they're healthy or fit. And that's also rather silly, is that people can be fat and fit, as in the aforementioned Eskimos or sumo wrestlers, or in fact people who happen to be big people and they keep themselves fit. You can also be skinny and unhealthy. You can also be skinny and healthy. You can be fat and unhealthy. You can be fat and fit. It doesn't really make any odds. You can be large on the outside and you have to be big on the inside, just as there's something called toffee, which is thin outside and fat inside, in the same way as that someone can appear to be well on the outside, from our Western point of view, let's say they're thin, but because they're consuming lots of toxins, then they actually have very fatty organs. I've seen this in dissection many times, is that the idea of morphology. I can think of one particular case, or two particular cases when we're looking at a couple of ladies, both of which you might define as being fat looking at them from the outside. But actually in dissection terms, when we came, one was indeed had many inches of fat on the outer layer, and when we got to the organs, yes, they were in fact very fatty. So you think, aha, well, there we go. However, in the other cadaver we worked on, same sort of aged person, same sort of size, and actually when we came to it, actually they had the correct amount of fat on the sort of the inner layer, and then when we got into the organ cavities, actually she just happened to have very large liver and kidneys, but she had large organs and actually looked perfectly healthy. And so this idea of someone being either healthy or unhealthy, just simply based on their size and shape, is really dodgy territory. And it is a Western cultural thing as far as I'm concerned. In fact, in many African countries and also places like Samoa and Polynesia, is that the bigger you are, the more beautiful you are considered. And in fact, in some countries, if you are too skinny, you are unmarriable. So we have to be careful in terms of looking at, just because someone's size is judging their sort of fitness and healthiness. Heart attacks and the statistics on people having heart attacks has no relevance to being fat or skinny. It's simply nonsense. Same with cholesterol levels. It is nonsense. This is, as we're finding out, I've been lecturing on this for about 5 years, and we're finding out in the media, finally they're catching up in saying, yes, actually we've all been led up the garden path with regards to the idea that saturated fat and cholesterol are somehow bad for us. Any questions so far? Okay. So what I'd say is, when we're looking at, oh yes, there's a question, is there a way to measure healthy without invasive measures? That's a really good question. I suppose it depends on what we even mean by healthy. To me, it's something how we feel in ourselves. Is that just because somebody else says, oh, you have measurement X with your blood pressure, measurement X with your cholesterol, and so on and so forth, is that, well, yes, but how do you feel? Welcome to how do you feel in yourself? A friend of mine, he has had diabetes for most of his life. And he's on a variety of medications, and it plays havoc with how he feels. And not that long ago, he got I believe it was a kidney infection, and because he was on things like metformin on top of the insulin he was taking, which is very common for diabetics, because of the kidney infection, he was told that he must be off for the metformin for a while, and he was rather concerned because he'd been on that metformin for about 10 years, and it had stabilised his blood sugar levels and so on and so forth. But because of the danger to his kidneys, he was told by the experts that he must come off it. And he says, what's strange is he hasn't felt as good in the last 10 years, having been told to get off this medication. Now, even though he's got to go back onto it once his kidney infection cleared up, he says the thing is, the time that he'd actually been off the medication, he actually felt really good. Now, to me, this is something else that is, what do we even mean by healthy? Isn't it how we feel in ourselves? It sounds like, because I can think of several people that have sort of been perfectly fine, gone for their, 6-monthly, yearly checkup with the doctors, and they've come out actually feeling really rubbish because they've been told that they've got X, Y, or Z, and they have this. Well, if they felt good before they went into the doctors, why are they suddenly feeling bad when they came out? That doesn't mean to say one shouldn't get ourselves checked up, but in terms of how we feel has got an awful lot to do with our health. So in terms of the question that was asked, is there a way of finding out how healthy we are without invasive measures? What do we mean by that? What do we mean by healthy? Is it that we come in that nice little average that so mental health is an important factor? Absolutely. Well, of course it is. What goes on in the brain has to go on in the body, doesn't it? There's nothing that the brain isn't doing that is not going to be reflected in the body, and vice versa. In fact, I think this is where the whole thing gets very highbrow now. Is that Socrates actually, I believe, said in something like 300 BC, maybe. Someone have to correct me on his dates there, is that for every disease of the mind, there will be a physical manifestation, and also vice versa. And this makes complete sense. I see this in clinic all the time, is that people who are depressed, we can see that we even have it in the language of our posture. Someone is weighed down by the world. Someone is upright in the world. And it's actually very hard. You can actually even do an exercise while we're standing here. Actually, you could stand up and sag your shoulders and say, I feel very, very happy. And your body, actually, there is a disparity going on there. Is that our body does actually match how our brain is feeling. So I'm drifting slightly off topic here because this is the first one of this, and there'll be a series of webinars, and I'm trying to keep it, I'm trying to follow my own rules, which is keep it simple, stupid. Because when it comes to health, we've all gone off the map as far as I'm concerned. We've forgotten the basics. And when it comes to something as simple as weight loss, we've gone mad. So the first question I would ask is, when we're looking at our health or whatever it may be, ask the question, what is it you actually want to achieve? And don't just give the stock answer. Is it actually that you want a different weight? I didn't say a less or more. I just said, do you want a different weight? Or is it actually that you want a different shape? Or is it you want a certain level of fitness? You want to, run a marathon or something like that? Or is it you simply want to be healthy? Because what you eat will change the result of that. Does that make sense? Okay. So the first simplest one, I think, is the idea of, when we talk about the 5 a day, fruit and veg and all the rest of it. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the best starting point, if we're just simply talking about, let's say, we'll start here and say, if you want to lose some weight, and actually, as a side effect, you actually you'll lose a bit of pudding in the old belly, is fruit and wine. They are the two fastest and easiest way for the body to manufacture fat. Okay? Yes, fruit might be good for you. In fact, a bit of wine is good for you. I like a nice glass of wine. But in terms of actually how the body uses it is different, is that fructose, which is contained in both, fructose, which is fruit sugar, and alcohol, which in essence is fruit sugar, they actually bypass the body's natural glycogen process, which is the way in which it turns whatever you consume into energy, and then anything left over it will then store as fat. In the case of fruit sugars and alcohol, it actually bypasses this mechanism and turns it directly into fat. Yeah. So when people are saying, "Oh yes, I'm going on a juicing diet" and all the rest of it, it's like, well, the thing is, and in many cases they actually throw away the fiber bit, which is the good bit of the fruit, and they end up having the juice bit, which is actually basically pure sugar. It's a great way of getting your body to put on fat. It just blows my mind. And now, as an easy example of how we can see this in nature, in case you don't believe me, is that if you think about grizzly bears. Okay, now in the spring and summer months, they tend to consume mainly fish, salmon. Okay. However, when it comes up to autumn, they're gearing themselves up for hibernation. So they actually switch their diet to eating mainly fruit. Is because it's the fastest way that a bear can gain weight quickly. So to have all that stored fat, which is stored energy, welcome Miss T, little Miss T, is to gain weight, because that's what he needs. He needs that storage of energy for hibernation, because he's going to be static, but obviously he's not going to be eating anything. So when I said right at the very beginning, is that in terms of when we're looking at weight loss, that first one is the only way we can actually lose weight, and this is the laws of physics, is that we only have 5 options. Okay, that means we either need to poo more, wee more, move more, and by moving more, that means we're actually going to actually sweat or breathe, and actually we do actually lose quite a bit of weight by simply breathing. There's actually quite a lot of moisture in breath, if you think about it, and that has weight. Not much, but it does actually make quite a bit of difference in the long run. And the other option, if you don't like either of those, if you want to remain constipated or hold your bladder, or you want to stay static, then the other 2 options of losing weight are either to walk around naked, wear less clothes, or less food. Literally, physically, that there isn't a magic way to lose weight by breaking the laws of physics. It doesn't happen. How are we with that concept so far? Yeah? Okay. So I'll just recap for those people that joined later on, is that this belief about vegetables. 500 grams of broccoli weighs the same as 500 grams of chicken. It simply does. But actually, broccoli takes up more space than chicken does. So in terms of when we're talking about weight loss versus shape, actually, if you're eating lots of vegetables, quite often you actually end up with a rather bigger tummy, because physically it takes up more space. Some of it does depend on how much you chew. Some people literally don't chew very well, and that makes it really hard for the stomach. Now, the stomach actually has about a 600 milliliter capacity, which is also useful for those people who are going, "Oh, I feel really full." It's like, well, did you actually look at the size of the amount of food you're consuming, whether it's meat and 2 veg, whether it's just a plate of vegetables? If you're actually not chewing very well, and you can't actually fit your whole plate of food into 600 ml jug, then it's not going to fit into your stomach either. And that will actually, for those people who have small hernias, quite often that will actually exacerbate problems like, say, reflux. Okay. Fat as itself takes up 3 times more space than muscle. So in terms of shape, this makes quite a lot of difference. Is that if we're continually poisoning our body is being told continuously to quarantine those poisons, and the way it does that is through producing fat for you to protect you. That also means you actually physically get larger because fat takes up more space. So if for some reason you're generally fit and healthy and you go to the gym and suddenly you start to actually gain weight for no reason, there may be that your body's being poisoned in some way, either environmentally, as I think it was Chris asked earlier on, or there's something else that a toxin is threatening the body in some way. Sometimes it's a poorly functioning liver or a poorly functioning kidney, and quite often, okay, bye Chris, thanks very much for that. It's every time we do these webinars, we'll be on the 2nd and 4th Mondays of the month, same time. So, two people can weigh exactly the same as each other, but they can also be a completely different size depending on what their muscle to fat ratio is. You can be fat and fit, you can be skinny and unhealthy, you can be large on the outside but big in the inside, because quite literally your organs are a different shape and size. This idea, if we use common sense again, someone who is only, let's say, 4 foot tall versus someone who is 6 foot tall, what makes you think that the liver and heart and lungs are going to be exactly the same size as each other? It's not going to happen. And secondly, if you think about things like blood pressure, someone who is 6 foot is going to have a different blood pressure than someone who is smaller. Yeah, the size of their heart is probably going to be much larger because it actually physically has to pump the blood much higher up. This is the case in giraffes. Giraffes have very large hearts because of the actual effort needed to actually pump the blood all the way up that long neck. So, if my first thing of this first webinar is, take away from this is, look at fruit and wine. It's boring, but if the quickest and easiest way for your body to manufacture fat is actually to give it loads and loads of fruit and wine. This doesn't mean to say that wine's bad for you, it doesn't mean to say fruit's bad for you. However, if we're looking at weight loss, one of the quickest ways to do that is to remove the things that actually makes gain weight, and that is sugars, in particular fruit sugars, okay, which then we come on to carbohydrates. So I'll leave you with this one thought, is that actually Granny had it right, the whole argument about meat and 2 veg. Yeah, veg means 2 green things, not broccoli and potatoes. Yeah, potatoes is carbohydrates. That is the thing that gets you bloated. That's the thing that basically makes you feel uncomfortable and also puts on weight because it will get transferred into fat much faster. Yeah, just remember, fat does not get turned into fat in the body. It's sugar that gets turned into fat. Yeah, in particular, fruit sugars, it bypasses that. Hi, JSAV. So to end with, just think about, if we're looking at a plan, and yes, you know, you can go on the paleo diet, the Atkins diet, all these different things. Just the word diet makes me cringe every time. Is the very nature of diet can actually put us into a frame of being a little bit grumpy, as, oh no, I'm on this diet. To me, it's far more useful. In fact, a chap called Professor Robert Sapolsky, who's written a brilliant book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. There was some research done on the very nature of how we feel about the food we're eating does affect how our body deals with it. And so if you're, particularly if we're stressed about eating, our relationship with food does matter. Is that if we're continuously grumpy about having this, you know, diet with salad all the time, well, nutrition, it's not that great. And you might be losing weight, but if you're grumpy, the body will actually be trying to hold on to a lot of that weight because it's thinking that there's a problem. But actually, if you're having your favorite food, everything in moderation, obviously, but if you're having your favorite food and you feel great about it, to bottom usually feel great about yourself. And lo and behold, successfully, you actually start to find what is the right weight for you. So in simple terms, think about removing wine from your diet. Think about reducing the amount of food you're having, assuming that you're actually having a balanced diet. And think about meals without rice, pasta, or potatoes. It's the simplest thing. I would argue that most of us probably have some kind of carbohydrate with pretty much every meal we have, which is just simply not normal. It would not have happened in the natural world. That doesn't mean to say you have to go on the caveman diet or the paleo diet or any of the other things. However, if you're going to have a curry, try having it with some cabbage rather than rice. Cabbage is, to be quite honest, cabbage is a really good substitute. I personally don't actually like cabbage that much, but actually if I find a way of cooking it nice and gently, I don't mind it. And it makes an awful lot of difference, actually. Yeah. So Granny had it right. When she says meat and 2 veg, that means meat and 2 green things. If you're a vegetarian, then it's protein and 2 green things. Okay. So any questions before we end that this evening? Okay, well, this is the first of a series of our Health Getting Back to Basics series. Thank you. You're welcome, Tom. And it's going to be every Monday on the, well, rather, oh, sorry, should I say every 2nd and 4th Monday of the month from 7:30. It'll be around sort of half an hour to an hour long, and I'll be broadcasting each time on Zoom. So that those people who've got Zoom webinars, you'll get these slides. And for those of you on Periscope, you'll see me there. So cheerio, little Miss T. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Cheerio. Bye-bye.